So, our last but not least speaker, Bruce Hill, Health and Safety and Environmental Investigations Officer, Advisor, TasNetworks. Bruce has had 34 years experience in power generation and maintenance industry and has been working for the last 2 years at TasNetworks as a Health and Safety and Environment Investigations Officer. Welcome, Bruce.
Ooh, that's me up there already. So yeah, look, today I've been asked to come along and just talk about this subject here, so working safely with mobile plant and equipment near overhead and underground power lines. It's become an issue and there's a bit of frustration around industry at the moment. So I've been working pretty closely with Workplace Safe, a lot of the local councils here in the south and industry to come up with something that's a little bit easier to work to. So this is the type of stuff that we're sort of talking about. Anybody working around with cranes, moving irrigation pipes, working with tractors. A couple of incidents there. You'll see a truck there with a super dog trailer on the back tangled up in the lines. They're just running out a bit of gravel on the road. Obviously didn't do a risk assessment prior to doing that work. The other one down here, post-hole driver on a tractor. All 4 tyres blown on that tractor. Just due to getting hung up on overhead conductors. All avoidable. So look what we're not talking about today, and there is some confusion. We talk about this traffic envelope. So the traffic envelope in Tasmania is set at 4.6 metres. So look, certainly anybody driving up and down the road, as long as their truck doesn't exceed 4.6 metres, certainly they'll come a lot closer than that 3 metres that we talk about plant and equipment. So if you're 4.6 metres and you go underneath our conductors, more than likely, if it's low voltage, you kind of come within 600 millimetres of it. If it's high voltage, it's going to be about 1 metre. The difference is that truck can't accidentally jump up and hit that conductor. That is the difference between the two. Whereas if you're operating plant and equipment, like excavators and cranes, there is a chance that the operator may make a mistake, his concentration may go away, and it can get up and potentially hit it. So the background, there are some confusions between the change from Aurora to TasNetworks now. Some differences between TasNetworks, WorkSafe Tasmania and Safe Work Australia guides. And again, little conflicts in it, just confusing people, so we've had that frustration brought back to us. 3 metre zone for all overhead conductors believed to be unworkable. So look, certainly a lot of people, when you go and park an excavator or a truck underneath a line, 3 metres isn't much to play with. So can we free that 3 metres up or not? And confusion around what training is required. Certainly under the Safe Work Australia guide, it talks about a person to be authorised to be able to work in that second zone or zone B. When you talk about our no-go zone, as Paul mentioned, that's where we come into play, and we'll issue an apparatus interface statement, or we'll do something and we'll authorise that person to work in that area. So there was some confusion there. So yeah, look, where does TasNetworks sit? With a bit in the middle there. Obviously we've still got Hydro Tasmania operating in Tasmania. They look after the dams and the power stations. TasNetworks, we purely look after the transmission and distribution. And of course Aurora these days is just purely the retail side. So just for those people that still got a little bit of confusion. The fact that this subject was raised certainly went back up to our CEO and our TasNetworks leadership team. And of course, safety is everybody's #1 priority. Our little catchphrase is all around zero harm and no harm to our people and the public, and minimising our impacts to the environment. So certainly this is a public safety issue, particularly for the construction industry. Hence the priority with trying to get this right and make it easy with everybody, and ensuring that our infrastructure that we look after on your behalf is also maintained safe. Just after this, look, I have got a little short video. It explains it a lot better. This video is going to be up and on our website reasonably soon. It is something you can take back to your workforces, use at toolbox meetings, but it does explain the dangers associated with working in and around our infrastructure and why this type of training that we're looking at introducing is going to be so important.
Electricity is a vital source of energy used daily by millions of Australian households, businesses and work sites. While the Australian electricity network is one of the safest and most reliable in the world, it is not without its dangers.
Every year in Australia, workers die or suffer serious injuries from contact with live power lines, above and below the ground. But the fact is, these incidents should never happen.
Because a lot of the time they happen to workers who know about the dangers of working with electricity. Workers who understand the risks but still find themselves in hazardous situations because the right steps have not been taken to ensure their workplace safety.
Electricity is a necessary part of modern day life. We just have to be conscious of our safety when working around it. Don't let electricity be a risk to your life or your workmates. Always follow safe working practices, assess the risks and plan the job at hand. Remember, you're being safe because your family needs you.
We've just watched an incident where someone was killed. The kind of tragedy that should not have happened but did and does too often. What went wrong here? The power lines on this work site, like others, carry electricity which, if contacted, can kill you. To avoid injuries, look around and identify where power lines are located and mark them at ground level before you start working outdoors. Talk to your boss or foreman and take note of any areas on the site which could be hazardous. Plan safe travel paths for machinery and equipment away from power lines. If you need to come within safe approach distances, you must arrange to have the power switched off.
Sure, you might be so skilled at your job that you hardly have to think about what you're doing anymore. But this is when incidents occur.
By making contact with these overhead power lines, the crane completed an electrical circuit with the electricity passing through the crane to earth and also through the worker touching the sling. The crane operator wasn't electrocuted because in this case he was in the cabin and the current didn't pass through his body to reach the ground. For the moment he was safe and remembered the first thing he should do was to try and break the crane's contact with the power lines. But the crane's controls were disabled by the power surge. Even so, from his training, he knew the best course of action was to stay put in the cabin and wait for the power to be shut off by the local electricity authority. Only if and when there is a visible sign of fire should you get out of the cabin. In this case, he jumped clear, making sure he didn't touch any part of the crane and the ground at the same time. That would have allowed the current to run through him. But even then, he was not out of danger. An electrical current flowing through the crane to earth has created an invisible radiating electrical field in the earth outwards from the crane. If he had walked or ran, one leg would have been at a different voltage from the other and the current would have flowed through his body, causing him to receive an electric shock. The answer was to keep his feet together in constant contact with the ground and shuffle or hop at least 8 metres away from the crane. All right, he was out of danger. But what about his mate? Whatever happens, don't try and go to the assistance of anyone who has received an electric shock, or let anybody else. All too often, secondary deaths can occur because others get electrocuted trying to help earlier victims. It's a tough ask, but even if it looks like the power lines are dead, keep well clear by at least 8 metres until the electricity authority arrives. They're the only ones who can tell you for sure if it's safe. Another hazard to be aware of is the potential for tyres to explode up to 24 hours after a vehicle contacts a power line. Create a 300 metre exclusion zone around the vehicle for a minimum of 24 hours. Following this, ensure the vehicle is thoroughly inspected for tyre and mechanical damage. Okay, this was obviously a dramatisation, but it was based on real occurrences, unnecessary and for the most part avoidable injuries which happen on work sites every year to workers just like you.
We were working on this pour and we had to get the boom tucked in pretty close underneath this power line. Jacko knew that we were well inside the no-go zone, but, well, we'd done it before, so we thought we'd be all right. Jacko made sure of that because, well, he's always a bit twitchy when it comes to power lines.
There are also specific clearances that you must maintain which can be found in the relevant codes of practice.
What nobody noticed was the power lines had got hot. Like, it was a stinking hot day and they'd sagged down about 1 metre, we found out later. It was close enough to the boom to have caused us problems, even without what happened next. This storm was coming in, this big summer storm, and the winds had picked up. I remember seeing the power line starting to sway, and that's all it took. I mean, the power line didn't even touch the boom. The electricity just arced off straight onto the boom and shot down the chute straight into Jacko and made 33 kV. Boom. We all thought we knew the ropes when it came to safety. We should have looked. We should have just stopped and assessed the risks. Shoulda, coulda. What did we miss?
Why did it happen? And why does it keep on happening? Every year, workers die or suffer serious injuries in incidents involving live power lines. Workers like you, who understand the dangers of electricity. Workers who knew the power lines were there, but were put in danger because the risks had not been properly assessed. So, what should have been remembered that day? That power lines can sag on hot days, changing clearance distances. That you should always work outside of the no-go zone. That strong winds can cause power lines to sway. That dim light can make power lines hard to see. That you don't have to be in direct contact with the power line to be injured. Electricity can arc across open space. All of these potential hazards should have been identified and adequate planning undertaken before work commenced on the site. And steps should have been taken to ensure contact with the power lines didn't occur. And of course, the same principles apply not only when operating cranes and booms, but also when moving many other forms of equipment and machinery regularly used on work sites, including scaffolding, tipper trucks, and elevated work platforms. Remember that tiger tails are only designed as a visual indicator. They are basically just reminders that power lines are present, and they do not insulate power lines. Whenever a worksite is situated near overhead power lines, or when equipment is being moved around close to them, contact can occur. But it's not just overhead power lines that are a hazard. At least you can see them. Hidden hazards lurk beneath the ground too. Worksite deaths and injuries are also caused when contact is made with underground cables, including earths. And as more and more power installations are run underground, the chance of hitting one is becoming more likely. So, what should you do? Firstly, always assume that underground cables are there until you know otherwise. Before you start work, dial 1100 or visit the Dial Before You Dig website 1100.com.au and consult the local authority to find out the location of underground cables. Remember, it's the law. So it's the essential first step for every job. Validate the plans before you dig by using cable location technologies such as GPS or ground penetrating radar and mark up the differences. Pothole at regular intervals to confirm exact cable locations and, importantly, communicate the exact locations of cables to your workmates. When using plans from Dial Before You Dig, double check when they were last updated. as cable depths can vary after road upgrades or new developments. You should never drive a probe into the ground looking for cables. It may sound obvious, but people actually do it and get hurt. Sometimes you'll find sand, tape, or marked bricks or panels to indicate the presence of underground cables. Other times you'll find a conduit or pipe with the cables enclosed inside. Be aware that direct buried cables could also be present, and that new electrical cables are sometimes laid using old conduits. If you think you are close to an underground power cable, excavate by hand carefully. If you are excavating where cables might be, use an observer, but keep them well away from the hole. And of course, if any underground cables are accidentally damaged, don't attempt to approach, touch or repair them.
Barry, mate, just stay in the cab there, mate. Your bit of cable there.
Keep the machine operator in the cabin and clear the area by at least 8 metres. Notify the local electricity authority immediately and wait until they give the all clear before proceeding.
Electricity and power lines are a necessary part of working life, but hazards can be avoided. While every situation is different, being aware of the hazards posed by power lines and taking necessary safety precautions can save lives, even your own. For more information on electrical safety and how to keep your workplace safe, contact your local electricity authority.
Or perhaps just have a talk to me. So look, the guide's in use today. Look, TasNetworks has its website over there on the far side. SafeWork Tasmania have their guide for overhead and underground electrical lines. We've obviously got Die Before You Dig, but also there's another player has come in, and it's the SafeWork Australia website and their guides that it's been brought out, which is a very good document. So together with WorkSafe Tasmania, we've been looking at where to from here. And look, I guess what we've decided to do is remove one of those guides, and that'll be the Tasmanian one eventually. And what we'll do is that we'll just have TasNetworks website, we'll have the Workplace Safe website, and they'll refer to the SafeWork Australia guide and also Die Before You Dig. So from TasNetworks' perspective, we'll recognise the SafeWork Australia and Die Before You Dig guides as the rule for working in the vicinity of our assets. As far as measurements go and all the rest of it, that information will still be available on our website. The no-go zone as it stands now, that doesn't change. Tasmania sets that figure. Back when they was pulling the SafeWork Australia guide together, none of the regions could decide on a measurement, so they just left it up to the states. So we've still got our measurement there. So look, certainly that zone A, which is for unauthorised persons, well outside the zone B, is around about 6 metres. So that's anybody using plant and equipment in the vicinity of the lines, and if they're unauthorised as such, aren't allowed to get within that distance. Moving forward, and this is where the change is going to be. At the moment, we talk about using a safety observer when you get into this zone B, or within 3 metres of the overhead conductors. Moving forward, we're talking about the use of an authorised person. SafeWork Australia talk about this authorised person with somebody with the training and competencies to be able to perform that role. So we've gone out now here in Tasmania with Workplace Safe, and we've actually named what that is, or what that training is. So an authorised person's workers who have successfully completed a recognised training course in overhead electrical hazards. We're also introducing a new zone. This is for identified low voltage. The assumption is that all our power lines out there are carrying HV, and if you're an unauthorised person and you can't identify the difference between high voltage and low voltage, well, the distance is just going to be 3 metres. However, if you can notice the difference, or you can identify the difference between the two, particularly around low voltage, we're going to allow that to go to 1 metre. So a lot of the calls that we get, we go out into the streets and suburbs, council workers out there, subcontractors putting things in. They certainly, they have to call us because they're within 3 metres of those conductors, or it could be just a fibre optic cable. They don't know the difference. So we go out there, we identify what it is, and then we allow them to work at least 1 metre up to that type of conductor. Now, if people have come and done this training and deemed authorised, they'll be able to make that calculation themselves, which means that there's no need to get on the phone with TasNetworks and try and line up a day for us to come out and give you authorisation. So that'll be the new zone that we're going to propose, but it will only be... no, Phil, you can't ask any questions at all. Yes, Phil. Your point of attachment, well, look, we are talking about plant and equipment, so this is operating machinery. So it's not an individual or somebody painting a house. That's different, and again, if we go back into those guides, we're talking up to probably about 500 millimetres for people working around that point of attachment. However, that point of attachment is TasNetworks, and again, if you have to do anything with that point of attachment, that comes back over into our game of play. Yeah, look, yep. Yeah, look, certainly if you go into that Safe Work Australia guide, it's got some control measures in there, which doesn't necessarily mean you've got to get in contact with TasNetworks. So certainly those control measures are more than allowable, and certainly from workplace safe's perspective, if you can show that you're actually working to those guides in there. Yes, we're recognising the Safe Work Australia guide and the control measures that they suggest. Yep. So look, our zones as it stands for now, that's as they are for now. So TasNetworks requires all persons to have written authority to work in that no-go zone. So that's the red bit within 3 metres. Oh, yeah, sorry. As far as private, no, it's up to the owner. Yeah, so look, whoever the owner is of that line, and look, because we're the big corporate citizen and we're working with Workplace Safe, you know, obviously this what we're trying to introduce will probably go out over that private infrastructure as well. So the guide itself will be used more than likely for that private infrastructure. However, if you look out at the race course at the moment where Hazel Brothers are working, some of that infrastructure out there belongs to the racecourse. And again, ultimately, they have to authorise Hazel Brothers to work in and around their infrastructure, however they deem fit to do that. More than likely, they would reference back to us and then use our guides. And does that make sense? Cool. Now, look, as far as the training goes, this is what we've proposed. So TasNetworks, as the electrical supply authority in Tasmania, considered an individual as being able to be authorised to direct work in Zone B, that are also capable of entering this Zone C and making contact with this infrastructure if they've been trained in working safely near electrical apparatus. So that's a national unit of competency. And they have attended first aid training within the last 3 years. So that training requires a person to hold first aid. So we'll just say if you've been trained in first aid in the last 3 years, that'll be a prerequisite. You've also got your construction industry white card. That tells us that you know how to do a risk assessment. And also that you are acting as or on behalf of the PCBU in a supervisory position. What we don't want to see is an apprentice or a lady from the fish and chip shop or the farmer's dog being the person that goes out there and does this risk assessment and oversees this work. So they'll be the prerequisites for somebody to be deemed authorised. Now, look, even though TasNetworks can provide this training, we don't deem this person authorised. We'll deem them competent at the end of the day. However, it is the PCBU's responsibility to deem a person competent to be able to go out and do work on their behalf. So the PCBU will be responsible for authorising an individual for the activity they are employed to undertake and direct in Zone B. Does that make sense? So the proposed training. So who can provide the training? Look, certainly TasNetworks, we've developed a training package based off the National Unit Competency. But yes, other people can train it. So any RTO can provide this training, just that it will need to be altered just a little bit to suit Tasmania. Our conductors and our cross arms and so forth are just a little bit different to other states. Time commitment, we're talking about 1 day. Venues, well, across the state we've got Mornington, Devonport and Rochalee, and that's where we would be intending to roll out this training. How often? That'll be just based on demand. And at the moment there's a fair bit of demand, so it'll be just interesting to see, once we do go down this path, how we cope with that. Cost, I did talk about that today with the trainers. A carton of stubbies was mentioned, but it'll probably be a little bit more than that, probably 2 cartons. Potentially up around that $200 mark, I believe. So it'll be around about that. Prerequisites, obviously the white card and first aid. And does it have to be renewed? So we've talked about this with Workplace Safe, we've discussed it. We believe we'd probably bring it in line like your high-risk licences and so forth. You've got to renew them every 5 years. It's not a competency assessment though. In this particular case, we would just want it refreshed. It wouldn't be a day's training. However, somebody, an RTO, would have to deem you as competent.
Is that a unit of the electrical practitioners course?
No, I don't think so. Not 100% sure, but I don't think so. The other thing that's been brought up and has been a bit of a bone of contention is for arborists and so forth, and the councils doing their own tree trimming in and around our lines. So look, part of this course is also trying to clear up that relationship there with this 3 metres working in and around power lines. So we've gone back into these guides from Safe Work Australia, we've gone back into the electrical supply industry stuff, and we've come up with some new figures, and we'll be posting these on our websites, and we'll be putting this into our training as well. So in this particular case, safe approach distances and clearances for an authorised person, somebody who has had this training, working in the vicinity of low voltage. Again, their plant and equipment, elevated work platforms, the extended tools they're using, again, 1 metre, they'll be allowed. But as far as the vegetation goes, the vegetation can be as close as 500 millimetres. And of course, when they're cutting that vegetation, it shouldn't be allowed to fall on it, and it should be overhanging. So this is something that we're proposing, and this will be put up on our website as well. Anything that's unidentified though, and or high voltage, and again this is for authorised persons, so even if the authorised person can't identify what it is, again, just to make it practical, rather than this 3 metres, everybody thinks at the moment if the tree is within 3 metres, you're not allowed to touch the tree. That's not quite the case. Again, it's plant and equipment and persons. As far as the tree is concerned though, if the tree is growing up to 1 metre, we would allow an authorised person to cut that tree as long as it fell away from the line or wasn't hanging over the line, or if you went to cut it, it didn't fall into the line. So questions bit, I guess. One of the questions I thought might be asked, implementation, or when are we going to roll this thing out? We've certainly got the training package ready to go, but when would it be enforced? That's something that Roman from Workplace Safe asked me the other day. So from the time that we've rolled it out, we would expect we would have a 12-month period just to enable people to get up to speed, and then after that period, it would be enforced in Tasmania. Up until then though, we've still got the 3 metre rule, and you would require a safety observer. Any questions before tea? Everybody's hungry, are they?
Well, thank you very much, Bruce. So thank you all again for participating in the 9th networking session for Better Work Tasmania. When you get a chance, please make sure you join if you haven't joined already. It's all free of charge, and we'll be having lots of networking sessions like this one throughout the year. So we may have one before the end of the year and then another 4 or 5 next year. And by joining, you will get direct invitations to these sessions. So thanks again, everybody, for participating, and thank you to the speakers for helping today. So safe journey home, and have a great WorkSafe month.